Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, and it's March, baby. Today we're talking about MSU's first round matchup in the NCAA tournament, the 15 seed Bryant Bulldogs. Before we start, a couple things. First, thanks to Michael Yoakum, who once again sent a gift of support to the show via PayPal. If you want to join the ranks of people who are helping support the show, head on over to your support page at the Final Force on theschedule.com/support. We really appreciate that. Next, the winner of the Beat Rod contest, and I think we mentioned before on a previous episode, Rod was near the bottom, but not last this year. So you're getting better. Maybe a
Oh,
couple
I
of
didn't.
years.
No, I don't think you did. I didn't realize that. Where did I
Yes,
finish?
you finished. We'll say bottom third. I think you were. So the winner was Ryan Armbruster. Sorry, Ryan.
Okay.
He had 50 points. So that's you get a point for every
Oh, you did go through this,
seed
and I
line
had
your
like
way. Yep.
68. Yeah.
Exactly. You were 68. I was 66. I think my wife was like 56, maybe. My
Wow.
son was 50 points, but I did not allow him to win this competition. So he is actually, I said, if you win the bracket, you can win the bracket and you get the prize. So he's eligible. Now that he's 18, I guess we'll say that. So second place went to Mike Huntoon, who's a supporter of the show as well. With 51 points, he beat out AJ Perrier on the tiebreak. So good job, guys. You definitely beat Rod and pretty much everybody else, obviously. So you guys will be receiving an email soon with details on how to get your Nudge Printing prize money. And finally, our bracket contest or challenge is open on Poolhost. So if you have not signed up before, go to poolhost.com. There you can set up an account and search for the Final Fours on the schedule. Then you can make an entry. It's free. For those of you who've played before, you should have gotten an email, and then you can follow the links. But basically, just gonna go back to Poolhost and go back to the Final Fours on the schedule. Anyway, so you can take on Rod, you can take on me, Gabe. Let's see who else was it. Dom, of course,
Are
and
there prizes?
there are prizes, yeah, for Nudge Printing as well, just like our other. So yeah, we got good prices there. $100 first prize, $50 second prize, maybe a third prize for $50 too. I'm not sure, or maybe 25. I got to check.
Is
So
that that's not cash. That's when you say
it's
$100.
it's a
That's
gift. Yeah, it's Nudge
gift
Printing
card at
gift card.
Nudge.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we're not like the North Carolina AD just handing out money in order to. For those of
Yeah.
you who watch the
I think
listen to the
I
bracket
should
show,
have the Bubba Cunningham
the Bubba
Memorial
Cunningham.
Pool.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that guy.
I
Tell you.
wanted to ask you before we get into
Sure.
Bryant, because I don't think I don't know why I haven't asked you, but I haven't. How does your wife feel about what Iowa did to Fran?
No,
She's
we were ready.
supportive
She
of
was ready.
that?
Oh yeah, very supportive. Yeah, and
Okay.
this is why you know I'm only around her as far as Hawkeye fans. I don't have a lot of Hawkeye fans that are in my life anymore now that I'm living in Michigan. But generally speaking, uh, and that it,
I would say that's a gift, but that would be mean.
that would be mean.
Anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
But that's that your essence, be your core, maybe. uh, no, she was ready for him to go, and I just think he had the dwindles, and I think that was sort of the feeling of the program. And there's as much as bothered as she was by the play of the team and sort of their performance overall. Watching games, it was always depressing because you watch a game in Carver Hawkeye and there's just nobody there. Like
Yeah.
Big Ten, certainly preseason, it's just really depressing because we remember going to school there and the crowd was pretty lively. It was a pretty good crowd.
Yeah.
And you see that, and then you turn on and you watch a wrestling match, and it's like totally jam packed. It's not like there aren't any
That's
Iowa Hawkeye fans, right? I mean, they're there.
that's
They're
the
just not
thing.
there.
I think of Iowa roughly as a similar fan base to Nebraska's. Same part of the country,
Yep.
same lack of much else to do in
Yeah.
those areas. And I'm
Fair.
not even saying that pejoratively. It's
No,
just a
that's fair.
fact.
Just yeah.
So you would expect, and I'm with you. I mean, I could certainly remember many years where Carver Hawkeye was looked like a full building and the atmosphere seemed great, much like it is at Nebraska.
Hmm.
And to see it go where it's gone is, yeah, it's unfortunate, but um that to me, I guess, I didn't realize. I knew it wasn't good. I didn't realize how bad it was. I think there was a number that suggested actual tickets being scanned on an average per game basis was something like 1/3 of capacity.
Yeah, about 3,000, 4,000.
It
Yeah.
was crazy bad. So it might even
Yeah.
be less than a third, it might be more like a quarter.
Well, it's about 12,000, I think, probably.
Is it?
That
I thought it was
that's
a little
maybe my
bigger than
guess.
that.
It's
But
one. It's
anyway,
one level. Just kind of with the floor all the way up. But
somewhere in
whatever.
that neighborhood between a
Yeah.
quarter and a third. either one is horrendous. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like Ellerby, Michigan bad. That's
Yeah. Well, I mean,
really bad.
it was, I think much like all college athletics, and you saw with HD sort of a, I think that sort of pulls people away from games in person because of
Yep.
course the availability of games, you don't have to, like, I mean, you don't ever go to games, but you can see every Michigan State basketball game, right? It's not a problem. And so that pulls a certain level of in person attendance. Yes, it's true there's not as much to do, but you have to generally, they're pulling people from the area. They're not just in Iowa City, because Iowa City and Coralville, maybe you're talking about 100,000 people. I mean, that's not
Right.
many, right? I mean, especially, if
Right.
you're not pulling a tenth of the
But
city into the watch a
but it's a
basketball game.
lot. I'm sure it's a lot like, it's just like it is here where, you've got people coming from the Detroit area, you got people coming from Flint, you got people like you coming from the West Side
Yeah,
to
probably not in
Michigan State
basketball.
games.
That's what I was gonna say. You
Yeah.
basketball, you're drawing from maybe Cedar Rapids, which is a bigger city just north.
Right.
So maybe you're getting the Quad Cities, but that's an hour away. That's probably pushing it. And there's really not much else closer to Iowa City. I mean, you're coming from Des Moines, that's like a 2.5 hour drive. So that's unlikely to
Right.
come that far. So anyway, so you're drawing from a smaller area, I think, and then with the advent of all the technology, at least the ability to sort of watch games and everything, and so you don't have to be there. And then you have a team that is performing poorly. I'm talking about Licklider. So this is after there's a lot of enthusiasm for Alford. Alford gets run out of town because it's just a disaster. He's losing players. There's all the kinds of things going on, which is Steve Alford stuff. Although he was relatively successful, considering. I mean, he wasn't like a failure. Licklider it was a disaster, right? It just didn't
Yeah.
work.
Yep.
Fran comes in, he gets some excitement, gets it going. But I think, and I think this is probably on the athletic department, and this may be something they have not solved or even thought about, because I don't think many schools, we've talked about this before, like Penn State's a good example. They don't recognize there's an opportunity to get some enthusiasm from your student base. And if you get students excited, you're going to have just
Yeah.
other people get excited to attend and be
Yep.
part of an experience. Because
Yep.
if it's not of an experience, well, I'll just watch it at home, right? It's just a, basketball game. It's not a basketball school, so you don't have to be there. Versus wrestling, that Carver Hawkeye is packed, 12, 13,000 people or however many. I mean, people don't believe me, but it sells out for all the wrestling matches because people, love wrestling. They'll come from all over the place just to watch wrestling, just like they watch football. But if you don't create that environment, or,
So weird.
well, I mean,
Anyway,
just like out
I
east,
say
right
that.
out east, they
I,
have like lacrosse was like a
look,
big thing, right?
that's a bias I have from my high school days.
Well,
I
you were
played
farming school.
basketball.
That's yeah,
I played
farming school.
basketball, and of course, the other big sport for boys in the winter is wrestling. So there's
Right,
always a little
exactly.
bit of a rivalry there. But
Yeah, right. Yeah.
yeah,
So anyway, so I think that contributes to it. And then I think what really was the death knell for him is, I'm going to guess that if I'm a basketball fan for Iowa and I've got Caitlin Clark and I've got Connor McCaffrey, and those are my two choices, because I'm not going to go to basketball games every other day, right? I'm probably going to pick Caitlin Clark just because it's sort of a internet sensation, whatever it was, that thing that sort of happened in
yeah,
Iowa. And so they sold out those tickets. So they were having high attendance in the women's game. And I think that drew fans away from the men's game, which is kind of strange, but I think that's probably partly true.
yeah,
And that's an embarrassing thing. And then you look, because they're just not, no one watches women's basketball for the most part. Now that Caitlin Clark's not there, but you saw the games this year and it looked bad. And so they're just, once you get some critical mass, you fall
yeah.
below that. You fall below that interest level. And I was just talking in the OR today about some with Tom Izzo, and I think what Michigan State's created. And you've been a Michigan State basketball fan your whole life, but I mean, you'll admit it. In the 1980s and 90s, you would not have described Michigan State as a basketball school in any way. I mean,
No, not
no,
no. It was
not like it is now,
what
right?
Michigan State was much more of a normal Big Ten thing, which would
Yeah.
be when they're winning, support level is good. I can tell you flat out, when I was in school at Michigan State, the hot ticket I'm talking about in winter was
Hmm.
hockey.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I remember because capacity at Munn, part of it is
Yeah,
capacity at Munn was
4,500,
much
5,000.
smaller,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
but student tickets, anybody could, Jesus, joined. I think it was Judd's Jungle. It was either
right.
Judd's Jungle or they might have still been the Spartan Spirits. I mean, they had a couple different names during that period, but it was nothing close I mean, not even the same universe to what the Izzone has been.
Right.
Um, but for hockey, it was your odds of getting student season tickets were weighted by your class standing. So I
Sure.
remember when I was a senior, I liked hockey, and Michigan State hockey was really good at the time, like it
Hmm.
is now. But I didn't have interest in going to hockey games. I was a basketball fan, but I stood in line for the lottery um, for a friend of mine because when I was a senior, because I would have a better shot at it. Like
Sure.
it was that competitive.
Yeah.
And basketball, you got to remember too, my 4 years, Michigan State was out of the NCAA tournament and not even close to being in for the first three of those. And it was only the third year that they even got into the NIT.
Right.
My senior year, they won the Big Ten. And so that was a big deal, but that kind of caught people a little bit by surprise.
Yeah.
That was so the end of the end of my college tenure was the point that Judd had really that late career renaissance, sparked in large part by Tom Izzo's recruiting as an assistant, really began. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I was at Jennison Fieldhouse for games that were so loud you could not hear yourself think, and I'm almost being literal with
Oh,
that. I was
yeah.
also at games at Jennison where I could have basically picked my seat.
Yeah. Well,
So it really, yeah, that's absolutely fair to
and
say
I think,
that
yeah,
that's
and
what
I
Michigan State was.
exactly, and I think that what Tom Izzo has created, whether by intention or sort of just organically, is a basketball culture where now you have a
Yes.
game out in UCLA or USC where we have three-quarters of the stands in USC are filled with Michigan State fans. There are just as
Well,
many alumni for Ohio State, Michigan, other Big Ten schools, but they're not showing up for the basketball.
you have to consider he has literally done it for a generation. I
Oh
believe
yeah, no question.
generation is defined as 25 years, I think.
Yeah,
So he's done it for that plus.
but I
And
would
when
just
you do
say,
that, you change. I have now, that's not to say that Michigan State will always be this way. It's going to have to be maintained and built upon, but he has absolutely, whenever he hands the baton, he's going to be handing an extremely healthy culture to someone,
right,
you
absolutely.
know, and
But
and and it would be unthinkable for anybody under 30 to not, or even under 40,
40,
to
yeah,
not
easily.
think of, yeah, to not think of Michigan State as a basketball powerhouse where you get those sellouts and
Hmm.
they travel well and all of those things. But you're absolutely right, man. That was not a done deal
So I
when I
guess my
was
point
growing up.
is it can be created. It can happen. I'm
Yes.
not saying it's easy or that it's likely, but you could be at Iowa and I guarantee you could do the same thing. Like I think you look at Nebraska, that is definitely, as you mentioned, not much going on in Lincoln. And there's a huge area, Omaha draw from. You could certainly get a lot of people who get into basketball if you start having a successful basketball program
There are other
for like 10
examples of
years.
this. I can tell you because I'm old enough to have seen it happen and be developed from the ground up. What do you think of Arizona as a basketball school?
Absolutely now.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good support. McHale Center, generally considered to be one of the better home environments. That's a real basketball school, right? Well,
Yeah.
Lute Olson basically built that from ground zero when he left Iowa to go to Tucson. So I saw that be created. There are other examples of this that happen. So you're absolutely right. But the hard part is you need two things, both of which are extremely difficult to get. And the second one, I think, is going to be much, much tougher to find than it was in the past. The first one is you've obviously got to get the right coach. You got to
Hmm.
get a coach who goes out and wins
Right.
a lot. But then you also probably need a coach who's going to be there for a long time.
Hmm.
That's the hard part now for anybody to do is
Yeah.
where are you going to find somebody that's going to stay in the same place for 20, I mentioned Lute Olson knowingly because Lute Olson held that job for, good God, probably 25 years,
At
maybe even a little
Arizona. Yeah.
longer. Might have been
Probably. Yeah.
longer than that. Might have been closer to 30. Because he left, I think he started there in 1981 or 82, something like that. And he was there until, I think, until the early aughts or the late 90s. So anyway, a long stretch, just like Tom Izzo's had at
Yeah.
Michigan State. You got to find that. Purdue's got that with Matt Painter. I don't think Matt Painter's ever going anywhere.
No.
And they were a basketball school anyway, but to identify guys like that, Michigan thinks they might have found somebody like that in Dusty May. We'll see.
Yeah.
On a lot of fronts, we'll see.
Yeah.
But that's a hard trick to turn. But I do think if you're Iowa, how old is Ben McCollum? Do you know?
I think he's 40 would be my guess.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's possible.
That's
Yeah.
and that just real quick to wrap up this coaching discussion
Yeah, right.
before we go into the main event. As we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, there is word starting to circulate that another ex-Drake head
They're a hot
coach,
commodity.
Darian DeVries, is reportedly now the front runner at IU,
Yeah.
which is
Get out of West
interesting.
Virginia, which got screwed anyway, right?
Yeah, it's interesting on a couple fronts. One being that he would be the choice at IU. Not you think of Indiana normally as a place that you look at the last few coaches they've hired. They hired Woodson from the NBA. Obviously, it was a different deal, but Arch Miller came from Dayton, but he had been the coach du jour
Yep.
for several years before he took that job. Before that, Tom Crane they took from Marquette, who had already been to a Final Four. Kelvin Sampson they got from Oklahoma. I mean, they're used to taking guys,
high profile guys.
yeah, bigger programs, right? So DeVries would be a little bit of an exception to that, but he's a Midwest guy. He's an Iowa guy. Had great success at Drake. I mean, you watched him more closely than I did. I'm assuming you were pretty impressed with him.
Yes.
At,
Although the one caveat I would say with him, and this is something that you can get away with in the Missouri Valley. I mean, to some extent in any conference, but if you have a kid you can keep for 3-4 years who's really good, like one of the best players in the conference,
yeah,
you can go quite a ways just with one player and kind of build around him. And so, is he going to be as successful without his son Tucker DeVries? I don't know. I mean, Indiana, you certainly have the resources to do it, but I wouldn't. I guess that'd be my only hesitation with him is that would he be able to do that without his son? Now he was winning before Tucker got there because I think he had the job for about 6 years, but he wasn't winning the Missouri Valley. So but he's building the program. So I don't know. I mean, he still built it largely with transfer. So it's hard for me to say for sure.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting if that's how it goes. And I got to say, I think that's a better choice than Brad Brownell would be.
Sure.
I feel better about that if I were Indiana. But what that also does is if that goes down, that means that Ben McCollum is there unquestionably for Iowa, you would think. And that might end up being the real coup in all of this stuff.
I think he is the best hire, and he may be the guy who doesn't fit at Indiana too. I mean, I don't know who fits at Indiana.
Yep.
That's just it. Just like I don't know who fits at Minnesota. Like I don't know who can go in there and actually win.
Well,
there.
I think
know.
people are it's gonna be very surprising if Minnesota doesn't hire Nico Medved because he's a Minnesota guy, Minneapolis guy. He actually coached a year on Minnesota's staff, so there's some connection there. And look, that guy's. I thought they were gonna hire him the last go around. It's shocking to me, seriously, that he is still at Colorado State. Because he's had sustained success at that program. They're in the NCAA tournament again this year.
Yeah, right.
And they're in the Mountain West, so that's usually a multi-bid league, but it's not a high major. You still got to be really good to get a bid out of that league, and he's done it multiple times. I think that could end up being a really good hire as well, even though I think Ben Johnson absolutely got the shaft. It could really be something that you could have 3 hires. If those are the 3 guys that those schools hire, I can't be critical of any of them. There's no guarantees that they all or any of them succeed, but they all would make sense. They're all guys that have true justification behind hiring them. They have track records. They've done things that seem to make sense, and they all make sense. You're not trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly.
Or vice versa. They're all Midwest guys. They're all from the general area. Two of them from the same state. Two of them from the same city that the school is in, actually. That would be really, I think it would be a really good off season if those were the three new hires at Big Ten schools for the conference. Because I do think it's fair to say that you compare the coaching in the Big Ten to what it was, say, 10 years ago, and I don't think it's quite as accomplished. It's not that it's bad. There's some really good coaches, and perceptions could change, say, 4 years from now.
Or 4 weeks from now.
Well, but right, but especially
Yeah.
like Dusty May has a few years under his belt at
Sure. Yeah.
Michigan. Um, the West Coast schools we have in the league a little longer, all of that. But I think it is a little bit down from when you had Thad Matta at the top of his game. You had Crane still at IU, had a Final Four under his
Yeah.
belt. You had Tubby Smith at Minnesota. You had these
Bo
guys.
Ryan. Yeah.
Bo
Right.
Ryan, yeah,
Yeah.
Bo Ryan,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not quite been that. I think Izzo and Painter are clearly, by any measure, top 10 guys in the nation. But after that, you got a little bit of a slip.
Yeah.
So it would be nice. I think bringing in guys like those three would be really interesting. The other coach that I want to mention real quick, and then I promise we're going to get on to Bryant.
we will talk the
does-
NCAA tournament.
There does seem to be strong word that Chris Collins may end up taking the Villanova job.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that would be a hell of a blow for Northwestern.
Yeah.
Because it's not an exaggeration. It's also not a tremendously high bar, but it's not an exaggeration to say he's the best coach that program's ever had. And
yeah, hands down.
what they would do to replace him, I have no idea. But boy, to take that program to the NCAA tournament 3 times, that's getting it done in that job. And you look at a year like this year where they're not going to be they aren't in the tournament, but I still think he did one of the best coaching jobs in the league.
Well, I wonder if they would have been had they not had the injuries, right?
I think
you can't know.
You can't know, but I'll tell you this: I think they would have had a shot.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's talk about Bryant. Michigan State, of course, opening at the 2025 NCAA tournament as a 2 seed, first time since 2019. I think they're a 2 seed. And they're up against the Bryant Bulldogs, America East Conference. They're 23-11 this season in the regular season. They obviously won the tournament title, which qualified them for the NCAA tournament. They're coached by Phil Martelli, but not Phil Martelli. The Phil Martelli Jr., whose father was a longtime coach with St. Joseph's. And he was the assistant coach at Michigan, was the head coach at Michigan for a couple of games, and then just inexplicably in the middle of the season for once. Yeah, right. Second NCAA tournament appearance for Bryant. The last one was in 2022. They've only been a D1 program for 17 years. So getting into Bryant specifically on offense.
Let's talk about that first. I always think that this is to give credit to Bryant. I think you have to make a distinction with these mid-major and low-major schools between schools that won their conference tournament, which of course is how all these leagues determine their bids.
Right.
Even the Ivy League got on that train a few years ago.
Yep.
They were the last holdout. There's a distinction between teams that do that and teams that do that and also win the regular season.
Right. Yeah.
The latter is where okay, that truly was the best team in that conference. And that is what Bryant was. They won both.
Yeah.
And so that I think solidifies them, stamps them as a legitimate, not a powerhouse by any stretch, but a legitimately good team for their level when you do both things. You mentioned the coaching. I just wanted to touch on that for a second for those who may not know. So Phil Martelli Sr., as you said, longtime coach at St. Joseph's, had that one great team with Jameer Nelson. People may remember from, it's probably, 15 years ago now, long time ago now, but had some great teams at St. Joe's, was a legendary coach there, got fired in a really weird scenario that never made any sense to me. It wasn't like he had started losing even.
Mm-hmm.
There was never any nonsense around him like off the court stuff. So it never made any sense. But anyway, he was fired. He ended up landing on Juwan Howard's staff, which was unfortunate because he's another one of these guys, kind of like John Beeline, that you're like, well, if he was anywhere else, you could root for him. But he made the choice to go there. Nevertheless, even through that, he remained a very close friend of Tom Izzo's by all accounts. And the relationship is such that Izzo's got a little bit of a relationship with his son too. And in fact, was according to Phil Martelli Jr., Izzo was the first call he got congratulating him on winning his conference tournament. That was before the
Right.
bracket came out.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So there is a relationship there between these guys, these three guys. And I think that obviously makes for an interesting side note. And I'll guarantee we're going to hear it on the broadcast
Right.
because it's one of those human interest color talking points they love. It's just kind of like in the Olympics, you're always going to get some tearjerker
Oh
stories.
yeah. Right.
You're going to get these kind of stories in the NCAA tournament, but it is real by all accounts. And yeah, and he was Martelli Jr. was an assistant on the staff of the team that went to the tournament 22. Obviously, he's now the head coach. This is his first trip as a head coach, and a heck of a start for him. And I would imagine, based on this, who knows? I haven't been scouring to see where, the mid-major coaching carousel is
Oh
going.
yeah.
But it wouldn't be surprising. Anytime you do what he did, you win a regular season and you win a conference tournament. And frankly, you've got the name that he
Sure.
does.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pedigree
That I
helps.
wouldn't be surprised to see him moving up the ladder.
I mean, Richard Pitino, there's only one reason he
Yeah,
has a
there you
job,
go.
right? I mean, let's be
Exactly.
honest.
I
Yeah.
gotta say, man, and we may end up talking about him in more detail, but for someone who was just an avowed non-believer in Richard Pitino, we took more shots at him on this podcast, but for him to go to New Mexico and do what he's done is impressive. It really is. You got to give him credit.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, just the whole Martelli story, just another one of these manufactured stories by the NCAA selection committee, right? To put Brian.
yeah,
All right, so let's talk about the Bulldogs on offense. They're 177th overall. That's mainly because they offensive rebound really well at 54, which is really good for a team like Bryant. Big Ten
yes,
school at 54, you're like, yeah, it's okay, pretty good,
right,
but it's really
right,
good for a team in the American East because they spent 10 games at least playing teams that are all major conference teams. That also is partly because Bryant is a really tall team. They're the sixth tallest team in the country in terms of average size, and this is America East, recall. And so you can imagine, I
right.
imagine their conference, they're probably giants. And these guys not only are tall, but they actually play too. So by comparison, Michigan State is 78th. So Bryant averages a full 2 inches more per guy than Michigan State.
Right.
And it's also why they are number 2 in shot blocks in the country. So they aren't very good anywhere else.
Well,
Specifically
wait
on
a minute.
offense.
Just to
That's
be clear, just to be
Oh,
clear,
shots
what
blocked
that
by opponents. Yes.
right,
So yeah, they do not have their shots blocked very often.
right.
Probably because they play in the America East, where they are very large compared to most of the other teams. So on offense, otherwise, from three, they are 198th, much better than Michigan State. But they're not
Not
great,
good.
obviously. Not good, yeah. They're 274th in three-point field goal attempts to field goal attempts, which means they don't shoot a whole lot of threes, right?
Yep.
And they're 156 from twos. So you hope that if you're not a good three-point shooting team like Michigan State, you're really good from twos. Well, Bryant's average, middle of the kind of pack of 156 from two. They only shoot a little under 72% from the line, so they're not great from the free throw line. They don't get the free throw line very often when they are at all either. They're 261st and first in free throw rate. And from a turnover standpoint, they're 134th in turnover percentage. So a little bit better than average. Michigan State is 145th, so I guess they're about the same there. And
Yeah,
so from their
one
offensive
different
standpoint is not anything spectacular outside of the rebounding.
right. And one difference I want to note with the turnovers, they're very similar overall, but Bryant has the ball stolen from them at a much higher rate than Michigan State does. And so that is a difference. What I mean by that is
Yeah,
Bryant tends to have many more live ball turnovers, which is important because those are ones that most easily lead to points.
sure.
But yeah, the overall profile here, look, it's offensive rebounding. That's driving it. And I've watched all or part of 3 games now.
So you don't
Uh,
have to, gentle listener.
I saw I saw a good amount of highlights from about 15 minutes worth of the St. John's game, which
Hmm.
was the only high major they played. They lost by 22, but they had their best player, their conference player of the year, miss that game. They had one other game against an NCAA tournament team, Grand Canyon, where they got absolutely run out of the building. They lost by 46. That was without their leading scorer, so they weren't full strength for that one either. But is that worth 46 points? Probably not. And then and then I watched their conference championship win over Maine. Um, so in seeing them, my overall impression is this. Not a team that takes a lot of threes. They do have some guys that can hit them, but there's no sniper. There's no 40% plus guy, and they don't take a lot anyway. They want to play fast, which we'll get into in a second, but it really is in large part about their physicality. It's about their offensive rebounding, getting second chances, being able to use their size at times, although they're not a great 2 point shooting team either.
Hmm.
Um, they do look to try to play downhill when they can, but they don't draw many fouls doing it. So it's not an there's nothing about them offensively other than the rebounding that really grabs your attention, in my opinion.
Right. And so then move to the other side of the court on defense. They're a little better. They're 148th overall in defense. They are 85th against threes, 100 or sorry, 46th against to two. They have a really high block shot rate, which does not surprising considering they're a really
Right.
big team in a conference with probably not a whole lot of size. They're 10th in block shot rate.
Yeah, and it's worth noting with that, unlike a lot of teams you'll see that sit in a high position in block rate, it's not driven by one guy.
It's just kind of
It's a
whoever's
bunch of
guarding
guys.
whoever is kind of, or
Yeah.
yeah. And from a defensive rebounding standpoint, they're not great. They're 129th, so much worse than they are on the offensive side. They don't turn the ball over too much on people either. And they're 102 in foul rate, so they don't foul a whole lot, but they can occasionally. So defensive profile is pretty similar to the offensive profile. Again, not great by
It's
anything, but sort of just like kind of like okay. And
it's a
maybe and
little
you wonder how much it's inflated by the fact that they're really big in a small league. I mean, I don't know.
well, and the thing is the adjusted efficiency does take that into account, the quality of the opposition.
Hmm.
It tries to.
Yeah, right.
So, I think what you've got the positives are they're actually pretty good at limiting opponents' shooting success. Number 85 versus threes, number 46 versus twos. That's pretty good. The defense against twos is obviously aided by the shot blocking, by the rim protection.
Right.
The problem is, and when you see this when you watch them play, they really are aggressive in going after shot blocks. And when you do that, it's not a shock that you end up at number 129 in defensive rebounding. Their
Right.
defensive rebounding problems are not the result of obviously not having the physical tools to do it. They do. They're big and they're reasonably athletic at the same time. They're not going to remind you of, 90 UNLV, but they're reasonably athletic. The problem is that they take chances, they get themselves out of proper defensive rebounding position because of it, and then you're able to exploit that. That is going to be a theme we'll return to for
Yeah.
this game because I think it's a real problem for Bryant. Um, they don't turn people over at all. They're sub 200 in that category. The foul rate thing, 102 is not a massively bad number, but it's just enough that playing a team like Michigan State, who looks to put you under pressure in the half court, it suggests to me that may end up being an issue too. And that's another theme we'll return to a little later.
And so finally, just as kind of round things out, they do play very fast, and so this is not a this is not a Drake draw. This is not a team that's going to slow
No.
you down and totally take you out of the game. Their overall pace is seventh in Ken Palm, so really fast. Average length of offensive possession is 25th. This is pretty similar numbers as from a pace standpoint to Samford, where
Yep.
they're and you know, it's one of those things like Michigan State is I think most people describe Michigan State as a fast team, but I think their overall pace is not that fast just because they do occasionally go to half court and also they play defense so well that
Correct.
they force the pace of the game. You know, there are less shots taken because they're forcing the other team to 20 seconds to get to the shot they want as opposed to their maybe typical 12 or
One
something like that.
one difference between this group and Samford. Samford, as people remember, I'm sure, they press a lot.
Right.
So they use pressure to generate pace. Bryant doesn't. Yet they're playing fast at both ends. Their defensive possessions don't last long, and their offensive possessions don't last long. But it's not because they're pressing. I saw them in those games I watched very occasionally. They would have like three-quarter court man pressure on the guy bringing the ball up, nothing trapping, nothing designed to really speed the game up per se. But yeah, they don't have possessions that last long at either end for whatever reason. The other thing that's noteworthy is, as we mentioned, and I'll give you some specifics now, is their size. So their starting lineup is 6'6", 6'6", 6'8", 6'8", and 6'11". That is extremely,
Right.
it's no wonder their average size is top 10 in the country because you don't typically see that where you've got
So,
at any level.
Jim Comparoni said that he didn't believe those heights. He thought they were all inflated, that they weren't actually that big. Do you put any credence in his assessment that the guy
Uh,
6'11" is actually more
I
like
didn't
six
hear him
nine and a
say that.
half?
That's interesting. Um, maybe, maybe he's right, but even if you say they're bumping guys up, I mean, it's one thing to say, well, they're bumping guys up by an inch. It's another thing if you're saying that guy's 6'3" and they're listing him at 6'6". Was he making that claim?
Yeah, he was saying the guys just 6'6" are like 6'4". Yeah.
Yeah, they looked pretty big to me
Okay. I mean,
playing St. John's. I
I
mean,
don't know.
he may be right to an extent. I don't think it's anything that drastic. But look, the other thing is, even if they weren't, they're still showing up the way you would expect a big team to show up in terms of areas where size could be a factor, right?
Right.
Shot
Yeah, like
blocking,
exactly.
rebounding.
Yeah.
So what does it really matter?
Yeah. Probably not a whole lot, except maybe you're not as overmatched in size standpoint as you may think you might be when you face them in the court.
It could matter in terms of what your guards can do
Yeah. Right.
defensively. I mean, look, we'll all know
Well, no,
when
right
we
away.
when we see him if if you know if Timberlake is looking Jeremy Fears eye to eye, okay. I guess we had some distortion going on there,
Turns out
but
he's bow-legged. Yeah, we had no idea.
yeah.
All right, so let's move on to a player to keep in the gutter brought to you by the Brothers Just Do Gutters. It's going to be raining here the next couple days. It is spring, so make sure those gutters are functioning properly. And no one better to take care of it than the people who just do gutters, the Brothers Just Do Gutters. They can take care of replacing, repairing, whether it's in your house, your business, wherever it might be, they can take care of the job. They do fantastic work. They get ladders. They're professional, great pricing. And as a listener to the show, you get 10% off if you just go to our support page to get their estimate and mention Final Four. So again, that's at tffinots.com/support. There you can get a hold of them, and they're going to come up with the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. We'll begin with Earl, not a singer of NSYNC, Earl Timberlake, a 6'6" senior, primary ball handler on the team. He's I guess, the point guard if they had one. He averages 15 and a half points a game. He's shooting 50, 36, and 72. But he doesn't take a whole lot of three-point attempts, I don't think. But he averages, 5 free throws attempts a game and a little over 8 rebounds a game, and a number of those offensive. So he's a guy who is going to get a lot of stuff done. 5 assists a game and about 2.5 turnovers, so about a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio.
Yeah, look, Timberlake is a really interesting player
Yeah, he's got an interesting career. You can kind of give that
for
career
this
path
level.
from, yeah.
He was a top 50 recruit, started at Miami, did a year
Mm-hmm.
there. Then he moved on the next year to Memphis, and he played on that Memphis. I believe he played on that same Memphis team that Amani Bates played for. Jalen Duren, the Detroit Pistons center, played for. And if you remember, that team was an abject horror show. Just
Is Penny Hardaway still
remarkable.
coaching, by the way? I can't remember if he
Yeah,
is he still
he's
there? I didn't.
managed.
No.
Um, but so he got out of there after that season, and then he went to Bryant. So he transferred, down a couple levels
Yeah.
and has really thrived. He was America East Player of the Year. If you look at the contributions he's making, I mean, this is a guy who's impacting every area of the game.
Yeah.
Like they don't have what I would term a pure point guard because I don't think he is, but he's still averaging 5 assists a game and
Right.
and just shy of a 2-to-1 ratio. So he's not bad. He's their second leading scorer. He's their leading rebounder. He's their leading shot block guy. So
Right. Two of
guy
them. Yeah.
leads the team in rebounding, shot blocks, and assists. That's rare. That's very rare to lead those three categories. And he's second in scoring. No surprise, he's your conference player of the year. So this is a guy that, they've got a few who have some high major backgrounds, but Timberlake, above and beyond everybody else, I think is the guy you would look at and say, yeah, that's a player who could be handling himself in the Big Ten.
Right.
Like he looks the part. He was the part coming out of high
Yeah.
school as a
Exactly. Yeah.
recruit. So again, interesting player. You don't always see that kind of, although maybe increasingly now in this era of the portal and instant eligibility, we might see more of this as we go. But you don't typically see this kind of player on a 15 seed.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
normally the other end where you might see a guy who's a sophomore and is playing incredibly well, and next year he's going to be at a high major. This is the other way.
Next is Rafael Pinzon, 6'6" senior. Played 2 years at St. John's. He's now at Bryant, obviously, leading the team in scoring at 18 and a half points a game, shooting 42, 39, 89. And he is the guy who does shoot a lot of threes. He shoots almost 7 a game, which is only 40% of his overall shots. So he is the scorer on the team. And that's
And
why that's why they lost by 46 to Grand Canyon.
yeah,
Right?
that's his big contribution. I mean, unlike Timberlake, he's not a strong contributor as a rebounder, as a defensive presence, as a playmaker. It's scoring where he leads them. And he's the one guy we mentioned. This is not a team that relies very much on threes for its offense, but Pinzon is the exception to that. He's getting 7 attempts per game, so you can expect that they're going to look to try and generate some looks for him from deep. And so consequently, he's the guy Michigan State really needs to load up on the perimeter.
Then we have Barry Evans, 6'8", 215-pound junior. He transferred from St. Bonnie's, averaging 13 and a half points a game, almost 7 rebounds a game, shooting 48, 37, and 66. And 2.5 of his rebounds are offensive. So again, that just kind of goes to the fact this team is going to crash the boards.
He and Timberlake both average about 2.5 offensive rebounds a game. Yeah, Evans is a nice, versatile guy for them in St. Bonaventure. So he came down from the A10 level, not quite a high major transfer, but a mid-major plus transfer, let's say.
Mhm.
And he's a versatile player. At his size and with his skill set, he could do a lot of different things. He's not a high volume 3-point shot guy either, but when he does take them, 37%, he's decent. Does more damage inside the arc, to be sure, though. And solid rebounder, can guard different people with his size and athleticism. So another nice player for them.
Then we have Connor Withers, 6'8", 200-pound senior, played for UMass Lowell, came to Bryant. He's averaging 11.3 points a game, 5.6 rebounds a game, shooting 38, 33, and 83.
Yeah, and he's also considered to be their best individual defender. He's second on the team in blocks behind Timberlake. So Withers is a guy. It'll be interesting to me to see how they use him. We do talk about their size, right? But
Yep.
one potential issue there, I think, at least at the start of the game, is who's going to guard Jackson Kohler.
Right.
because they don't have a guy, either of these guys, either Evans or Withers, isn't really a great physical match for Jackson inside. And so that will be interesting to me to see how they opt to do it.
And then finally, we have Keyshawn Mitchell, 6'11", 215-pound sophomore, averaging 8.6 points a game, 7 rebounds a game, plays about 20 minutes, shooting 53, 32, and 58.
Yeah, long athletic player. I don't know what the situation is going to be at Bryant. One thing we haven't talked about, but is worth mentioning, besides being a very big team, this is a very old team.
Right.
Timberlake's in his fifth year, Pinzon's a senior, Withers is a senior, Evans is a junior. There's a lot of, and their reserves are experienced as well. Mitchell is one exception. He's only a sophomore, and he looks like a guy to me. I will not be surprised. And again, I don't know anything about their situation, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him end up at a bigger program next year because he
Yeah.
kind of oozes potential. He's one of those big men, and normally you know it when you see it. If you see a guy his size who can also move, and he can, and you think, well, that's a heck of a pile of clay to mold, and you could really have something. And that's not to say that he's been nothing at Bryant. He's had some games, and we'll trying to remember here. I thought I had the notes for this. Yeah, I do. So he's been inconsistent as a scorer. So what's grabbed a lot of people's attention coming into the tournament is he's averaged 14 points a game in his last 4 games. So that's about a 5 point bump over his seasonal average, right? But the
Yeah.
7 games prior to that, he was averaging 6.5 points a game.
That's what makes his average 9 points.
That's right. What it suggests is there's a lot of roller coaster here in terms
Yeah.
of his offensive production, and that actually holds for his rebounding as well. I looked at that. I didn't crunch the numbers that degree, but you see a lot of 7 rebounds, 1 rebound, 8
Hmm.
rebounds, 3 rebounds. It's a lot of inconsistency, which goes along with being a young big man. And that's what he looks like to me. He looks like a young big man who's got a lot of potential due to his physical tools. Probably in another year, with a little more size added to his frame and a little more maturity under his belt, could really be something.
What's interesting about the tournament too, that if you're Bryant, is that you've actually got you've got a display of all your players, and they're much more likely, I think, to get contacted to transfer out or something like that, right? I mean,
It's
it's
it's the
a showcase.
it's the it's the it's the serious equivalent of what football programs are now worrying about in regard to their spring games. Why a lot of
Right.
football programs are canceling spring games because they worry that it's a showcase for the portal.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate, but it's probably true because if you think about it, over the years, spring games are often a, a coming out party for younger players.
Hmm.
It's the first time anybody's really gotten a chance to see a redshirt freshman play. And sometimes those guys can really open your eyes. Well, in the modern environment, they just went through the equivalent of an NBA workout or an NFL
Right.
workout
The
session,
combine for you.
Yeah, combine. And you may lose them at that
Yeah.
stage. I had never really thought about that, but you're 100% right. The NCAA tournament is the ultimate basketball version of that.
Well,
So be
soon we'll have
careful what you wish
contracting.
for.
Soon we'll have contracting. Won't be an issue. Right. So then finally go to the reserves. Kevon Kramer, 6'7", 225-pound senior, averaging 7.8 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game. He obviously serves in the post as an extra guy. He's shooting 59, 33, and 63 on the year.
Yeah, good, solid, experienced post reserve. He'll help out, kind of split post minutes with Mitchell. He's a very different player, obviously, much shorter. So that's another thing, you know, I don't think a lot of people are spending much time on. There's this a lot of talk focusing on Bryant's size, and with good reason, right?
Right.
But Mitchell only plays half the
20 minutes.
game.
Yeah. 20 minutes a game. Yeah.
The other half they're kind of small ball.
Hmm.
And so Michigan State, as much as people are spending time talking about size in this one, I don't know that this is a game where I'd expect, say, Zapala to be playing a huge role because I
Unless
think
you want to
Michigan
use them the other
State's
way, and like you think it gives you an advantage, right?
maybe,
That's always the question, whether he hurts you or can help you,
but
more.
we know that Tom Izzo's decision making tends to be dictated by the defensive end.
Yeah, no,
And that's
exactly.
where you would look at it and say, boy, when Kramer's out there, is that the matchup you want? I don't worry about Carson Cooper. He's
Right.
6'11", but he can hang in
Hmm.
those situations. But it might be one where you see fewer Zapala minutes, maybe more Cooper minutes, maybe more Jackson at the 5, maybe even some stretches where, we've seen it a couple of times this year where they might go a 3-minute stretch with Cohen Carr as the 5,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah. And so finally, we have Ja'Kai Robinson, 6'5" junior transfer from Miami. He's averaging a little under 6 points a game, 3.5 rebounds a game, shooting 48, 17, and 72. And he does play quite a bit, 21 minutes a game as the backcourt reserve.
Yeah. Obviously, the number from 3 tells the story here. Not a shooter. But
Don't shoot.
2 years of ACC experience at Miami, so he's got that. He's like the nice thing for Bryant in that respect that you don't always have in these games. Although, as I say, probably increasingly we're going to see more of this. Is that this team has enough guys who have played big time basketball that you wouldn't think there would be that intimidation factor.
Right. Well, Ja'Kai Robinson's played in the Final Four. If he
Right.
played for Miami,
There you
he
go.
was there. At least he
Exactly.
was at least on the team, as
Right.
freshman.
So he's been around the highest level you can have at this in this sport. So that's exactly right. I don't think they're likely to be as a group particularly intimidated by this.
Sure.
It used to be that you had some of that effect in the NCAA tournament and these kind of matchups when it would be a bunch of guys who had been at a low major their whole careers and all of a sudden they're playing guys they see on TV all the time.
Yeah.
That
Right.
that's out the window for this. These guys,
Yeah.
there shouldn't be any of that.
You would think less to just the transferring aspect of everyone just moving around all over the place. It's less intimidation for that sort of thing. All right. So who do you have as a player to keep in the gutter? I can only guess who it is.
Well, pretty obviously it's got to be Timberlake
The
because
guy who leads in rebounds, steals,
yeah, and
assists,
everything
and
except
blocks.
scoring where he's second. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's their best player. He's the guy who came into college, the most highly regarded, kind of a bumpy road to get here, but now he's arrived and he's probably to one extent or another exactly where he thought he'd be. Um, Not necessarily to be playing at Bryant, but that he's a conference player of the year. He's a guy who's impacting the game in all different ways. Yeah, he's the obvious choice.
So that brings us to who cleans the glass best? Brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, if you need your glasses cleaned out at your house or your business, high rise, whatever it might be, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids can do that job for you. They can also power wash your house or business, get all that grime off there that's built up over the winter. They can do that very quickly. They're very professional. They get up in the ladders, again, so you don't have to. And they have great pricing. They can go inside your house too, so they clean the inside. They clean the screens, the stuff you never clean on your own. You get 15% off as a listener to the show if you just mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And you can find that at our support page, the Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. And just as a quick side note, I was saying the nurse is asking me today. She's mentioned I was going to have to record, and I said, oh yeah, we got a couple sponsors, and I told her about the Brothers to Just Your Gutters that we sponsor the player that Michigan has to keep in the gutter. She thought that was quote adorable, and the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, she thought that was very cute that we do that. So I don't know. I may have to rethink our contest here. All right. So right now this contest is over as far as the score. You're up 17-10, so you won in the year. So we're just going to be playing for pride. I think if I lose, I'll have to wear a basketball on my head, and so that's my motivation. I will start the next if Michigan, the next live stream after the Michigan State game. I will wear a basketball on my head if I lose this contest for at least like 5 minutes until I can't handle it anymore. But so that'll be that. You can tune in on YouTube if you want to see that debacle if they lose. So I think I get to pick first this time, and so I will go with Jackson Kohler.
Okay, good choice. I'll take Carson Cooper and I will take Jace Richardson's been pretty good to me. I'm going to take Jace Richardson.
All right. And that leaves me with the fourth and truly random pick. Um, and this is definitely a game I do not think we're going to see much for Zapala. So I don't think his minutes are going to be enough to dictate. One thing, I don't think it's rebounds. I think the only obvious choice then it goes Carr. It certainly is a matchup where you think you could get a decent amount of minutes. And I almost wonder with his athleticism if we're going to see just an uptick a little bit in his minutes. I mean, this is a game also I could imagine seeing a little bit more Fiddler as well. But I'll go with Carr just because I think he's been a little bit more reliable on the boards than anyone else. All right. And so finally, the 5 keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. All our prizes for our contests. And this again, reminder, you can head on over to poolhost.com, search for the Final Fours on the schedule, fill out a bracket, and you can get entered in a drawing in order to, a contest in order to win free Nudge Printing gear. It is the best stuff. We've got a ton of it for my family. It's super comfortable, great Spartan apparel, all kinds of other schools too. If you're looking for something from someone else who didn't go to Michigan State, is a fan of another school, or wants to get some college gear for like Albion or Eastern Michigan or something like that. So head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. As a listener to the show, you get 20% off as well if you just type in Final Four as one word in checkout. Go over there today. You'll be glad you did. So the first key to the game is the boards. We mentioned that Bryant is not great on the defensive end. They are really good on the offensive end. Obviously, Michigan State's elite on both ends. What is Bryant going to do? I guess, are they going to still continue to try and rebound offensively? I imagine since that's the one thing they do really well, they're still going to do that because they probably can't afford to try and play differently in this sort of game.
That's exactly right. I don't think that's just true of Bryant. I think that's true of anybody. I said this. I don't remember who I was having the discussion with. Might have even been you and I texting during, but it was somebody I was talking to during the Wisconsin Michigan debacle on Sunday. And, it's easy to sit on
Oh,
the
shooting
sidelines
threes.
and
Yeah, right.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, hey, Wisconsin's, they're dead tired. They're short on all these shots. They got to stop taking them. And I think the same thing. But on the other hand, it's a very difficult thing to say to your team, well, that way we've been playing all year, we're going to scrap that now. I think this is one of the things that a lot of fans completely miss how difficult that is and how reticent coaches are to do that. That to just try to change your DNA, forget halfway during the season, we're at the end.
Right.
And all of a sudden, Bryant's going to, hey, guys, we got to get back. Forget that offensive rebounding. Now, maybe they will try to do that. I don't know. But I think if you're playing a guessing game, it's generally safer to assume that a team is going to play much the same, they're going to try at least to play much the same way they've had all their success with. If you're Bryant, how could you sit there and say the things that have gotten us here are no longer a good idea? That just doesn't,
Right.
you know what I mean? When you put
Yeah.
it that starkly, now, what they probably are saying is, guys, we've been a good offensive rebounding team all year long, and we've got to be one on Friday night.
Exactly.
You
The
know,
best we've been. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
they are a different kind of offensive rebounding team than Michigan State. Michigan State has been very, very good. They don't do it the way Michigan State did it in 98, 99, 2000, the four to the boards thing. Michigan State doesn't do that anymore. They're a little more quote unquote normal in terms of how they go about it. They've just got some very good individual offensive rebounders. Bryant does send people. Like you watch them, they got guys crashing.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine if you get the offensive rebound.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't, you've got a big problem. Now, at the other end, I would expect Michigan State can do some damage on its offensive boards because, as we said, Bryant is going to try to block shots. They're a little undisciplined with that stuff from what I've observed, which tends to go along with being that aggressive in terms of rim protection. So I would think Michigan State's going to have chances there. The real battle is Bryant's offensive boards versus Michigan State's defensive boards. And that's a key. It's a big key for this game. Because if Bryant can do a job there, they may have a chance to hang around in this game. It's a big component of what they do offensively. But if Michigan State is getting defensive rebounds consistently, not only are they eliminating second chances for Bryant, but because of the way Bryant approaches it, Michigan State may have a real advantage in transition. So this is a
Which
very key component to this game.
brings us perfectly to our second transition. The second key to the game, which is the transition game. It was a good transition to the transition.
Right.
Bryant, very fast-paced team, so they play loose and they have quick offensive possessions, and they also just try and run quite a bit as well. Like, which I've heard many people kind of describe Bryant as sort of like a mini Michigan State, or sort of like a Michigan State light, in the sense that there's sort of an obvious in the American East. But the problem is they only have 7 players as well to try and play a transition game,
Yes.
and
Yes.
with the offensive boards. I mean, there are ways. There's certainly scenarios you can envision where this game could get out of control quickly, but you can see that maybe they can hang around and cause Michigan State some problems as well.
It's, in my opinion, it's definitely got some boom bust
Yeah,
potential with
which is
Bryant.
maybe the best you can hope for is Bryant. To be honest, as a 15
I
seed,
guess, yeah, but it's
right?
also really dangerous because, generally speaking, and I mean that very generally, I think over time what we see is that the best approach to trying to pull off this kind of upset is if you can shrink the game. You shorten
Minimize possessions.
possessions,
Yep.
you limit possessions, you shoot threes well, so that's another equalizer. You put those things together, sometimes you can pull it off. That is not Bryant's blueprint. At least it hasn't been at any point this year. And generally speaking, if you want to get into an up-tempo game with Michigan State, you are begging for it. Begging for getting smacked. I mean, really. I,
Yeah.
I think that, more than most programs, Bryant will have the message right in terms of having to deal with having their players try to be aware about what Michigan State does in transition, what it's like, because Phil Martelli, senior, spent years in the Big Ten, so he's seen it. Although I would say the years he was at Michigan were not like Michigan State this year in terms of transition. He
Sure.
was there at a low point for Michigan
Yeah.
State's transition game, in my opinion. But still, he's a smart enough coach. He'll have transmitted that message. His son seems to be another very good coach. I'm sure that part of it will have been done as well as it could be. But we talk about this all the time in the non-conference, right? It is a different deal when you've got live bodies in green and white coming at you.
Yeah.
And I have a suspicion that at least for segments of this game, Bryant has the potential to get a little overwhelmed by that. And again, it's
Yeah.
exacerbated because they want to play fast. So it's
Exactly.
going to
They're
be
not. Yeah.
easier to suck them into that, right? And then, as we talked about, if Michigan State's clearing the defensive boards well, look out.
Yeah. Well, this brings us to the next key of the game is the 3. And so you just mentioned a little bit ago that if you're a 15 seed, one of the keys of you've got to be able to hit shots that you don't normally hit or at a higher clip than normal. And the three is definitely one of the great equalizers in the game that you can, so if you're hitting threes and the other team's hitting twos, you're eventually going to pass them. So I think the beginning of the show, right? Mike Garland saying you can't trade threes for twos because you're going to lose.
Right.
And so anyway, it's hard to envision them not being successful or being successful without being able to hit the 3. And then of course, Michigan State, the other question is not only for this game, but maybe moving forward, assuming they beat Bryant, can they get that 3 ball? It's been definitely better the last 4 or 5 games. So can they keep that up
Yep.
and maybe even go a little tick higher?
Yeah, I think both of those things are true. For Michigan State, it's can they sustain their relative success recently? And on the other end, can Bryant overperform in a one game scenario? And that's always the risk. It's fine for us to say, hey, Bryant's not a great shooting team, and they also don't take a lot of them. And that's been true. And so if you were talking about Bryant trying to project out another 10 games, that would be extremely valid. But in a one game scenario, you never know.
Right.
So for Michigan State, you want to kind of keep Bryant where they've been.
I also wonder too, and a little part of this key, which relates to Michigan State, is the emergence of Jackson Kohler as a reliable 3-point shooter. I think the last 6 games, he's maybe shooting 50% from three.
Yeah,
I mean, if that sort of thing holds up, this is a kind of new emerging sort of thing that can happen that can certainly help the team go a lot further than maybe we would have thought even a few weeks ago, right? Like,
absolutely.
right?
It's something that's true, and Jim Comparoni, more than anybody I know, hammers on it relentlessly every year. And that is the difference it makes for Michigan State offensively when they've got a four-man who's a perimeter weapon. And he's right about it in this sense. I think generally speaking, the best, there are some exceptions I can think of, but for the most part, the best offensive teams Michigan State has tend to be the ones that have that AJ Granger, Adam Ballinger, Goran Suton, Kenny Goins kind of player emerge. And most of those guys tended to come on as veterans. Well, Jackson
Right.
is at the end of his junior season, so he's about right on time for that. And we know, obviously, with his injury history, that's been delayed, I think. But yeah, if he's even a guy you can count on for one make a game, that's a big difference because
Sure.
teams will have to start defending you differently.
Well, and we've seen him in Illinois. What, he's 5 of 6 there. I
Yeah,
mean, he's got the potential to hit a lot more. So you can't just like, well, we'll give him as one a game. You got to, it's going to be a real
right.
problem.
And if they're going to give him room, he's also got to take those shots.
Yeah, and
You know,
he seems
that's
to
where
have
you
no
really
hesitation now.
that's where you really get into trouble is when you pass on open looks. That tends to grind the gears of the whole thing. And yeah, it's important for him to take those shots, and obviously you want him to make as many as possible.
Well, I just got an email alert from Nudge Printing, actually, as we were talking here, that they now have a 27% off sale. So forget the Final Four 20% off. You can get 27% off select Spartan apparel. And why is the 27 so significant, Rod?
27th straight year Michigan State is in the NCAA tournament.
Exactly. 27th straight year, longest streak in the country. All
Look
right.
at
So
that. I didn't even need any help.
look at that. You're just I was telling someone today, like you're like an encyclopedia, like you're like, oh, remember that second round game against Harvard or whatever?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah,
I
I
it,
know.
it used to feel that way. I don't know. You start getting older
That
and
hamster starts,
oh,
yeah, taking breaks a
the
little bit more than it
as
used
I
to.
was as I was describing to someone recently about it, I feel like they're for Apple users, I feel like that multicolored wheel is churning as I'm
Just a little bit
trying
more
to
that
pull it from my hard drive.
that color wheel of death as it's trying to
Yeah.
load the next program. All right, so the fourth key to the game is the free throw line. Obviously, Michigan State has been living at the line most of the season. A little bit less recently. They definitely got back on the beam, although they didn't manage to beat Wisconsin. They definitely shot better from the line there. They've been worse of late from the free throw line, but have been winning games. And so strangely enough, the one game they finally shot the ball well from the free throw line, they ended up losing that game against Wisconsin. But anyway, definitely a big part of the game for Michigan State. And I mean, the secondary thing obviously is that you can get Bryant, a fairly shallow team, into some foul trouble, which might cause them problems as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a good additional point too. I've been thinking of it just mostly in terms of an advantage in point production. Bryant is it's interesting because if you're not a team that relies on threes heavily, you would think that would probably mean you'd be more likely to be and they do try to play downhill some, but they just don't get to the line very much. And when they get there, they don't cash in at a very good rate. They're a little bit under 72% as a team. Michigan State over the course of the season has been very good at getting to the line, very good at cashing in. As you say, they've been struggling a little bit over that 8 game win streak in both those areas. But I do think, ironically, in a loss, they were better against
Yeah.
Wisconsin. And look, this is a game that I think I would expect Michigan State to be trying to get downhill regularly and looking to put Bryant in bad positions. And a nice added bonus relating to that, you just stated, which is a very good point. If you can get them in foul trouble, this is not a team with very much depth. So that could be important as well.
And so the fifth key to the game, one that may scare some Spartan listeners here, is the zone. Bryant does play zone. They play matchup zone at times, so they're familiar with it. Might they try to try it in order to slow Michigan State down a little bit, at least in the half court, and cause some confusion and some problems. Obviously, zone has gotten Michigan State into trouble occasionally this season, though I think of late when I've seen it, they've done a pretty good job dissecting it. But
Yeah.
anyway, it might be something they try, to throw out
It's
occasionally.
it's interesting because it's going to be hard to identify whether Bryant's in matchup or not at times because they're like Michigan State often is they regularly switch.
Right.
And so sometimes that could be a little bit confusing as you're watching it. Are they switching or are they in a matchup? And either way, look, the nice thing is it's a little easier in some senses for Michigan State attacking a matchup because of the way it operates, you generally can get away running your man offense stuff against a matchup
Like
zone.
your pick and roll stays the same pretty
Yeah,
much, right?
so it
Yeah.
won't it exactly. So it shouldn't impact what they're looking to do that much if that's what Bryant does. Now I again in watching Bryant, they certainly weren't regularly playing matchup. It's not Jim Boeheim, but they were in they did use it. They sprinkled it in the games that I watched, which were again they're tougher games of the season. Two NCAA tournament opponents they played and their conference championship game. Those were the ones where you would expect to see them really pulling out all the stops. And I saw it. I didn't think I saw like a steady diet of it.
Right.
Might they alter that balance a little bit against Michigan State? Yeah. Might we even see them try to play some 2-3 or something? Yeah, you can't rule it out. Um, the key for Michigan State is when they're playing zone, you got to attack it. We know what those principles are. You have to get the ball into the gaps, and you got to force that defense to contract and don't settle. You can take good open threes if they're there. That's fine, but don't settle. Don't get
Yeah.
suckered into hoisting 33s in this game. I don't think Bryant's likely to play that much zone to that where it'll get to that point. Except, the one thing is, you mentioned it, if they were to get into foul trouble, they just don't have much depth.
Right.
So sometimes
They
that
don't.
could be a tool you use to try to avoid foul trouble. The other problem with it, though, from their perspective, is they are already not a great defensive rebounding
I
team,
was just gonna say, yeah, that's the
and
problem.
that could open up real problems there as well. So I guess I'm not expecting to see heavy, heavy doses of it, but you never know.
And I'll just add one last part for a sixth key to the game, which is you didn't have, but I think the fact that Izzo has so much experience in this tournament, and certainly as a two seed, and as a two seed who has lost, I think the level of focus and attention to detail will be there this week, and so I suspect that'll be an advantage. It's certainly, but it is one of those things that as a two seed, there is pressure on you that the longer this game is close, like I know they played St.
Yes.
John's and they ultimately lost that game, but I think that game was about tied with 10 minutes left or 12 minutes left,
They
something like
St.
that.
John's pulled away in the last like 12 minutes.
Yeah.
It
So
was
that,
like a one possession game up
but a
until
one
that.
possession game with 12 minutes left in the NCAA first round with 2 and 15 feels way different
Yep,
than, a game in November.
100%.
Right. So that's something you have to be cognizant of. And the fortunate thing for Michigan State is this is really the only time that I think that they have to deal with that sort of seeding pressure, we'll call it. I don't know what else to call it. So they have to but
Yeah,
this is a team that seems to have pretty much dealt with everything as far as weird pressure. So I don't expect this to be an issue, but something to think about.
look, I think there's never a guarantee in any of this stuff, but this team to me has displayed a maturity in that respect. Like, even if you look at the games they've lost, they didn't play, I didn't think they played horribly against Wisconsin in that game, but they didn't play near their best. Yet they were mature enough to be able to hang around and have a real shot to win it, or at least extend it. I think that was true of the three regular season losses in the league, and it was even true to a large extent in the Kansas and Memphis losses in November.
Yeah.
I don't think there hasn't been a game this year. Michigan State, I don't believe, has lost a game by more than single digits.
I mean, I think they're 5 losses. I think it's 5 losses, 6 losses. It can't be more than 25 points total. I mean,
Right.
which is
Right.
remarkable.
It is. And so what that suggests to you is whatever happens, this is not a team that's going to be very likely to allow itself to be knocked completely off kilter. Like this is the anti-Illinois. I mean, really,
Yeah.
where you just see things start going against that team and they fold like a house of cards. That's not this Michigan State team. So you would think that will translate to what you're talking about, that 215 game pressure, whatever that is. I have faith in this group. I certainly have faith in Tom Izzo to not allow that to happen. If they get beat, I don't expect to be sitting here on whenever late Friday night, early Saturday morning,
Saturday morning. Yeah.
us lamenting the fact that Michigan State just kind of folded mentally. I just don't think that's likely.
Well, we will be live after the game on Saturday morning. Let's be honest, it's going to be 12:30 or something like that when that game is done. And it's kind of cool that I there's two ways to look at this. One is it's nice Michigan State's one of the first games, which you have that like on a Thursday, like one of the noon or 1 o'clock game. Although it always is kind of tricky with work schedule. It's nice when they win that and get it out of the way, and then you can enjoy the first round. The other problem is that if they lose that, then it ruins the entire the entire.
Wasn't my recollection is that the Middle Tennessee game, they were in the first window on
I think
Thursday.
so. Yeah, I think it was one of the first things, and
Because
so
I
it's
don't
like great.
remember
I get this.
watching much of that tournament after that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You can
So
cut two ways. I will say it it makes for Thursday will be fine.
yeah,
Friday, it's going to be, especially as we get past late afternoon, then there's the tension starts building up and you just want it to be over with, you know? So that part I don't love, but you make a good point. At the very least, you're going to get 2 full days worth of enjoyment from other games because whatever happens to Michigan State isn't going to impact that.
yeah. It and we'll have Thursday's actually. I'm looking forward to Thursday too because obviously Drake's playing. Probably their last NCAA tournament appearance for some time, is my guess, because they're going to lose their coach
I
and
don't know. They
their
seem
team.
to have a knack for this stuff,
I
right?
mean, they got in three in a row, but I just the the history in this Missouri Valley is you kind of cycle up and down. But maybe their AD's got some pixie dust or something that he uses that helps him pick the right coaches. But anyway, I get to watch them in the evening, and then after that, of course, the close of the day in Denver with UC San Diego, everyone's darling, taking on the Wolverines. So we'll see how
Oh,
that
I
goes.
can't wait. Can't
We'll get an
wait.
idea how it goes with seeing Wisconsin earlier in the day as they start off
Yeah.
things in Denver in the morning, which is
Yeah.
crazy that they
Brutal.
play early before noon on Mountain Time. Anyway, so make sure you head on over to our support page if you want to get any links and check out our sponsors at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. Obviously, ways to support the show too. And go to poolhost.com, search for the Final Fours on the schedule. Please join our drawing. The more people we have in, the more fun it is. Those obviously have to be done before the first tip, like 12:15 or something on Thursday. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.